So we totally just used up every piece of material that we had before we click record.
Yeah, that's about par for the course, though.
This is true.
every time we get ready to record, I click in and Low Tax is in here and he's immediately dropping one-liners, and it's like, dude, can you just save this until I hit record? Like, what are you doing, man?
And then we spend 10 minutes trying to fix the computer, and we're done for the day.
It was more like 20 this week, but you know what? That's okay. It's fine.
So, George, you saw The Odyssey, and I take it you concur that MILF Anne Hathaway is worth seeing.
Anne Hathaway is a goddess, and we don't need to be applying any four-letter acronyms to her, but she absolutely stole the show. She really did. She was the best performing actor or actress in the movie by a pretty wide margin, I would say. Others did fine. Matt Damon was fine. I didn't hate it, but he wasn't like really standout. He did a decent job.
He's kind of not supposed to be, though. Things kind of happen to him.
Well, yes and no. We don't want to do a spoiler episode for that yet. I think we can save it for next week. But I do see exactly what Ed was talking about with last week's observations. If you want to hear those, you can go back and listen to the episode. And we don't really have to say more than that. I think, Proctor, you saw it this week too, didn't you?
I did not. I was going to, but then it didn't happen.
Okay, so homework for this week. And Low Tax won't be driving 45 minutes to the nearest theater, so he can just sit on mute the entire time next week. So, cool.
Maybe you should just go pirate it.
It was definitely not Nolan's best flick, but it was really good.
I was going to say I'll get with Ed. We'll figure something out here.
This is Normal Men, a podcast from four men who are clinging desperately to normalcy in an era when that's asking a bit too much. I'm George in Charlotte.
In DC, I'm Proctor Malone.
In outer Florida, I'm Low Tax Speedrun Enjoyer.
And I'm Ed in Boston.
So we have a guest this week that we are very excited about. We have managed to free Mike Black from his wasp infestation or whatever it was that was affecting his computer last week. So we've now got him coming in loud and clear. And we are excited to learn about the happenings in defense world from one of Blue Sky's finest.
Yes, hello. Yeah, so I guess should I do an introduction of myself if folks don't know who I am?
Sure, yeah. Do you have formal credentials?
If you're not a regular on NatSec Blue Sky, which admittedly there are only like 5 people that are, so
well, I was kind of wondering like what the overlap was between the listener base for this and I want to say NatSec Blue Sky because there's like 3 of us, but Blue Sky in general.
We do consider ourselves Blue Sky's official podcast. Whether Blue Sky itself would.
George, it is Blue Sky's only podcast.
That's right. It's about, I would say the listener base is about 50% NatSec Blue Sky and 50% JRPG furry type people.
That's not wrong. Hi, James.
And there's probably more overlap between those two.
There absolutely
worse than one might think.
Yeah.
But for our listeners who aren't on NatSec Blue Sky and or are not just generally perverted, etc., Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. So short version of kind of how I guess I came to be a expert in the NDAA, I guess, if there is such a thing. So I was an Air Force officer for a while, about a decade. So for most of the 2010s, or actually all the 2010s. Maintenance logistics, but I had a very weird career that involved me doing a whole bunch of other not really maintenance logistics stuff. And then, of course, I'm a politics nerd, obviously, so you kind of combine those two things. And even though I've never actually worked in the Pentagon, which is something that I almost like at least once every 6 months, that somehow comes up that people think that like I've worked there my whole life. And I'm like, no, I've been to the Pentagon physically 3 times. But I've been in and around U.S. defense policy going back, like I said, to, we'll just say 2010. Currently, I'm a civil servant on the Global Strike Command MAGCOM staff, which is a good time any standard disclaimer. what I say is not the position of DOD, Air Force, blah, blah, blah. Although if you think that, you probably need your head checked. And also, since we're going to talk about Congress, if there's anybody from Tom Cotton's office listening, I'm going to say nice things about armed services, so please do not try to get me fired again. Which is the thing that I mean, fire is maybe a strong word for what I'm describing, but Tom Cotton's office once took exception to something I said on the interwebs and made sure that they knew that my boss knew that I had said something they were not happy about. So that's a thing that happened. So yeah, that's basically me, my background in a nutshell.
Just in case there is anyone from Tom Cotton's office listening, this is not the opinion of Mike. This is my opinion. Y'all are some assholes, and I hope you have a really bad day.
Now, I will. One final point of clarification, or not clarification, but further elucidation on that. It was one. I'm pretty sure. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure it was one specific individual in Tom Cotton's office.
No, I'm happy to paint with a very broad brush there. And also, this has nothing to do with whatever they went after you for. I'm sure you deserved it. This is just a general principle. Like, y'all are some assholes, and I hope you have a bad day.
And that one individual was Elbridge Colby.
Look, man, first we say we want our elected representatives to listen to experts. Then we say...
But not like that.
The funniest thing, it wasn't even partisan. Like, believe me, I even when I was active duty, I said some partisan stuff on social media I probably shouldn't have. Or at least that, if I got in trouble for it, I would have had to be like, yeah, okay, I kind of deserve that one. This was not that. This was just a straight up complete, like, bro, you said something that was just factually wrong. It was stupid. And I said so. And his staffer saw it. I didn't like that. It's probably something the staffer had told him to say. So, yeah.
So for those of us outside of the NatSec blast radius, so to speak, which hopefully is most of us,
yes,
there's been some trouble in NDAA land. Can you catch us up on A, what the NDAA is, and B, what's happening there?
Yeah. So what the NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act. I'm going to go on. I would say it's a short tangent, but let's be real. This isn't going to be really that short of a tangent. But it will be explaining the difference. Yeah, and they really never are with me. The difference between authorization and appropriations with regards to the United States Congress. So historically, if you go all the way back to the very, very basic Article 1, the core power of the Congress is to appropriate, i.e., to give money to the rest of the federal government, particularly the executive, to do things with that Congress says, here's your money, go forth and do. That makes sense. Now, the authorization piece is what people will kind of get a little bit confused, or they kind of get the wires crossed. So, authorization is first, it's something Congress made up. It's been around for. I did some Googling because I actually didn't fully understand how far back it's not. Actually, it started in the early to mid 1800s, so like 1830 to 1850. Initially, it was literally just the non-appropriations committee within the Congress, or just other people within the Congress, passing a law that set some sort of bounds on whatever program or thing that Congress was, quote, authorizing the federal government, the executive branch, to do. So that kind of goes back and forth for the rest of the 19th century. And if you think of it in like the most simplest terms possible, authorization is Congress saying you can do the thing. Appropriation is Congress saying, okay, we told you can do the thing. Here's the money to actually go do the thing that we authorized you to do. Now, it sounds pretty straightforward, and it was kind of for called the first 150 years of the Republic. If you kind of, if at least for me, I mentally been the modern Congress starting on or around FDR's time in the White House. And so if you use that as your chalk line for, okay, the modern, quote, modern Congress starts about then. That's also kind of around the same time that the lines start to get a little bit more blurred with regards to authorization appropriation. Specifically, you have stuff like the Two Ocean Navy Act, which was passed by Congress right before World War II. It's what basically built the Navy. That is what the U.S. won World War II with. And interestingly, that was actually an authorization act. It was not an appropriation act. So it was literally the then 1940s equivalent of the Armed Services Committees. They had, War Committee and Naval Committees back then, since they were two separate departments. Passed, said, hey, we authorize the U.S. Navy to have a whole crap ton of carriers and battleships and a bajillion ship Navy. It was then the appropriators that came in after the fact, after the White House and the Navy, and really the Department of the Navy and the White House came back to Congress and said, hey, you want us to have this gigantic Navy, it's been authorized. Here's what it's going to cost. And the appropriators said, yeah, okay, that sounds fine to me. Here's $1 bajillion, go forth and start getting the shipyards to crank out ships. I mention that because a lot of people, I think, mentally conceive of the Two Ocean Navy Act, just use that as an example, but I think is a pretty good example, that it actually appropriated the money and said, this is actually the money to go build ships. That's not the case. It was an authorization act, and the appropriators had to come after the fact. Now, that's an important point, though, because at that time, and for the next, I'll say, 30 to maybe 40 years, it was pretty standard for the appropriators, at least when it came to defense, to not do weird things with what the Armed Services Committees said in their authorization. And so you would typically get an authorization bill that would say, well, actually, let me back up for a second. So up until 1959, specific to defense, there was no actual limit or anything on defense. We just kind of all accepted that it's in Article 2 and it's also in Article 1. So Congress will provide money for a Navy and also some Army and some other stuff. And whatever money they decide, the executive may ask for it, the executive may not. That's what the money is. The Armed Services Committees, though, which are now Armed Services Committees because we've had, the National Security Act of 1947, established DOD, now we have Armed Services Committees. They want to claw back a little bit of power from the Appropriations Committees, and this is the ongoing tension, which is true for all aspects of Congress, but it's really true for defense. So in 1959, they passed a law that effectively says in 2 fiscal years, in 3 fiscal years, in FY 16 or 62, we will have the ability to, quote, authorize spending for the Department of Defense. And that was the first National Defense Authorization Act. Interestingly, it was like 3 pages long. The current one's like 2,000. And so the historical bill, or the first National Defense Authorization Act, literally just authorized the spending. And it was very, very straightforward, very high level. Literally, you have this many hundreds of millions or billions of dollars for a Navy, some for an Air Force, build some bombers, buy some aircraft carriers, whatever. So that kind of construct goes forth through the 60s, through the 70s. Again, pretty straightforward. Obviously, there's some we'll say debate over Vietnam with regards to the Congress, but honestly, even that doesn't really apply to this because that was, I'm speaking very generally here, kind of a agreed upon thing in the Congress, but it wasn't like you had one side in Armed Services saying, oh, we really want the war to continue, and the other side in appropriations saying, we want to zero the war out. Congress was kind of for the war until they pivoted and said, actually, we're all against the war, and they kind of all decided more or less at the same time that now they were against the war. So that brings us to the 80s. And by the way, please jump in with questions or stop me as I continue talking. So that brings us to the 80s.
Yeah.
And I'll lump 80s and 90s in together because, again, very, very similar. You have the authorization. Now, by this time, the NDAA has gotten a little bit bigger. It's certainly become more of a policy bill at this point. So now we're talking like 2 to 3 to maybe 400, 500 pages in length. It includes policy stuff, but of note, it only includes defense policy stuff. It's the National Defense Authorization Act. Defense is in the name. So it's whatever Armed Services Committee wants to include in this iteration of the bill, they include it. And then, oh, by the way, it still includes the authorization stuff, kind of the core fiscal nature. And even at this time, 80s, even in the 90s, Appropriations Committee more or less said, okay, whatever the authorizers in the Armed Services Committees said, we will probably go with that because, to be blunt, we're appropriators and we really don't know what we're talking about. I said I was going to be nice to Armed Services, not that I was going to be nice to the Appropriations Committees. Which is, we can talk more about that later, but I think most people, particularly in the defense policy space, would agree that however much you disagree with somebody on Armed Services about whatever, Armed Services as a whole is much better positioned in either chamber, even the House, for, God love them, is much better positioned to understand defensive issues and understand the intricacies of the budget and just all things defense, as opposed to the defense appropriation subcommittees in either chamber.
Right.
So,
now, my understanding from kind of the civilian non-military associated angle is that DoD stuff, or I guess it's DoW stuff now.
No,
DoD stuff is
just because they slap some fresh paint up there, Proctor, doesn't mean you have to give them what they want.
If the NDAA goes through, there is language in it that actually does formally change the name, in which case we'll all have to, okay, fine, Pete, it's DoD.
Yeah,
okay.
it's finally, but right now still DoD. Okay, gotcha. So
doesn't that cost like $100 million or something too?
Yeah, give or take.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, there's already I don't know how much, but a large chunk of that has already taken place because you get told change the name, change your letterhead. But yes, there's lots of other stuff that signs other than the one on the door of the Pentagon, which they obviously he made a big show of changing. But it's 150, I think something like that, 150 million.
I want to say it was something around that.
Money.
So this stuff is A, highly technical, and B, super path dependent. There are decisions that you have to make now that are downstream of decisions that got made 15 or 20 years ago. And there's a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge that goes into kind of keeping these long-term plans operational, that you really need people who have some contact with at least those information surfaces to be able to keep the plate spinning. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's 100% fair, and I think it'd be a fair statement that most defense policy folks would agree. The biggest complaint we have with appropriations is exactly that Armed Services, as much as a lot of us disagree with a lot of stuff that a lot of people in Armed Services, honestly, bipartisan basis, think or don't think, you can usually at least depend on the folks in Armed Services to understand second and third and fourth and fifth order effects over the course of a 3 to 5 to 8, 10-year time frame. And yeah, the appropriators rarely, certainly these days, the appropriators rarely, it's not how they think, it's not how they operate. So
right. It's a different budget cycle than we use for most other things.
Yes.
In the federal government.
Yes.
That, these are not
the almighty FIDUP, Futures Year Defense Plan, 5-year plan. So yeah, DoD, communism and Marxism and whatnot. DoD has run on a 5-year plan ever since the 60s. McNamara instituted that, and that's a whole nother topic. Of folks have thoughts about the FIDUP, but yeah, the budget year of execution obviously is the only one that actually matters, right? Because that's what's being spent. But there's a reason that DoD has a 5-year plan, and then they develop another 5-year plan outside the first 5-year plan, on a rolling decade cycle. Because I mentioned shipbuilding before. Even back when we could build ships in a timely manner, which we can't now, it was it did not take a month to build an Essex class carrier in World War II. We started building them in 1940, 41. We had them by 43, 44. So yeah, it's a very different time cycle, which is why Armed Services, at least, as much as anybody on the Hill can get it, they at least get it. So yeah, that kind of speaks to the previous appropriators. They, certainly in other aspects, they exerted their influence, but usually with defense, with very few exceptions, they tended to defer to the Armed Services Committee. So now we move into the 2000s, and obviously we've had the revolution on the Hill. We're kind of getting into whatever we call the current construct of Congress and just the party relationship in general. But of note, even in the 2000s, with everything else that was going on the Hill, particularly with defense, particularly with the war in Iraq, defense was still very bipartisan. The NDAA was still very bipartisan. Defense appropriations was still very bipartisan. Typically, you would, from a House perspective, you would rarely get more than 50 votes against. Even in the 2000s, the Senate was sometimes passing the NDAA by voice vote. Imagine doing that today.
Right.
So the next kind of real big breakover point with regards to specifically the NDAA, now that hopefully folks at least broadly understand this distinction between authorization and appropriations, is kind of the 2010s. So by way of example, I had to go back and do a little bit of historical research, and some folks on Blue Sky helped me out.
We don't do research here. You're here under drastically incorrect pretenses.
False breed. Sorry. I thought about some random. Yeah. Well, it was like 2 seconds of research. So I feel like that doesn't really qualify. I mean,
all right,
really
that's more like a proptering. It's fine.
Yeah, more counts as research. I'm sorry, someone else did the research, but it still counts to be reading it.
Look, man, Mike didn't show up with a PowerPoint today, and I think we should all recognize that he's floating a little out of the professional comfort zone.
If it was visual medium, I probably would have slides.
We do appreciate the restraint, regardless.
So I went back and looked, Googled, didn't research, Googled, and there was 2 times historically prior to this past couple weeks ago where the NDAA failed cloture. Which, not to insult your audience, cloture, it's the whole filibuster thing that you need 60 votes to, quote, pass something in the Senate, which isn't really passing, but it's neither here nor there. So failed cloture a couple weeks ago, and obviously we'll talk about that here in a second. Historically, though, there's only 2 other times in the history of the NDAA that it failed cloture in the U.S. Senate, and both of those times, they were in the early 2010s. I think one was actually 2010 itself, and I think one was 2013. It was what I'll describe as a pissing match over amendment policy. Now, why that matters, and this kind of is now circling back to what the NDAA has slowly become, is up until the 2010s, Congress, still passed laws that were, substantive and about things. Congress used to do that once upon a time. That really, for like most of the latter half of the 20th century, there were kind of 3 kinds of substantive laws that Congress would pass. They would have authorizations, they would have the appropriations bills, and then there would be laws that would be discussing stuff and things and governing and using the powers of
that's
government.
the thing where they rename post offices.
Yeah.
That is it. Yes, correct. That's the idea of a substantive bill now.
So the NDAA has I think for the last, I think this is the direction you're headed with this, has for at least the last several decades been kind of the Christmas tree bill to end all Christmas tree bills, in the sense that you hang lots and lots of different ornaments on it because it's a must pass bill, and so it gets passed. But
yes, although I would say that's only been the case for maybe the last 15 to maybe 20 years.
Okay.
So prior to that, like it was a big bill. It became a big bill, but up until, we'll say 2010, kind of an arbitrary line in the sand, but we'll say on or around 2010, it was still very defense focused. It had lots of things in it. It had lots of policy in it. It had other stuff. And to your point, that was very much a slow burn over time. So yes, certainly there was stuff that, in the 1980s probably would have been a standalone bill about, defense thing, whatever, that was, circa 2005 looped into the NDAA, but it wasn't really until 2010 and beyond that it started to become this non-defense complete. It's one of 3 bills or 3 types of bills that Congress is guaranteed to pass in a given year: the reconciliation bill, the appropriations bills, and the NDAA. Yep. That's about it. At least bills of substance. We still rename post offices. So in 2010, 2013, the amendment thing was so important because at the time, the Dems controlled the Senate. and they were kind of having some thoughts about how much give or take they wanted to give to the Republicans in order for the Republicans to have the ability to hang or not a bunch of amendments into the NDAA. And so the fact that they didn't get close to those 2 years, it was not this big substantive disagreement on the NDAA writ large. Both years, the NDAA still passed with like 85 votes. In the Senate, it was just Republicans saying, okay, we don't agree with what you're doing with the amendments. We want the ability to hang more amendments in it, and we're going to, cross our arms and stomp our feet to deny cloture until we get that. So the point that I'm going with on that is, even in the relatively dysfunctional Congress of the 2010s, certainly, 2014 and beyond, and certainly the first Trump administration, the NDAA was still by and large a very bipartisan, very, not even must pass. It was just it was a thing that we would pass because we're serious about defense. Even House Armed Services, that the House has gone lost their minds on the Republican side the last, decade and change. It was still a very reasonable bill, and there was stuff that people disagreed with, but there, by and large, wasn't any culture war stuff in it. That kind of changed circa 2021, 22. The House bill, not 21. It would have been the FY23 bill. So it was after the Republicans were getting control of the House for, the midterms of the Biden administration. So they threw some culture war stuff in there, but it was still fairly minor. And then the Senate just, stripped it out, as the Senate usually does, with things that are passionate, i.e. insane, from the House. And so you even throughout the Biden administration, by and large, the NDAA, yes, it became more partisan. To be clear, they're both in committee and on the floor for the final vote in both chambers. Now you're starting to look like 125 to 150 votes against it, but even in committee at that time, it was still usually a handful of people that would vote against it. One of them was Ro Khanna, who would always offer like a bajillion amendments, get most of them in the bill, and then still vote against the bill because that's Ro Khanna.
Okay, but it's so about 2022, right? Which is when Russia launched the Ukraine war. And that is when the meme of the purple-haired girl going, combined arms are such a Gemini thing.
Yes.
And so, maybe that sent them on a downward spiral on the culture war stuff. And it's just gotten worse ever since.
I mean, well, that, and then, the portion of them that are, think Russia's bad would probably oppose that. But there's certainly the Russia caucus, of which there definitely are some on armed services now more than even then.
Although probably fewer now that Orban is gone, seemingly.
Are we going to have to talk about Laura Loomer today?
Okay. Yeah, we might. Actually.
Yeah, I think we do. Sorry in advance.
Please.
So all that is the run up to what was the big thing that happened with the NDAA.
Are we actually getting to the fireworks factory?
A couple weeks ago now. So yes, we are. I mean, everything before wasn't fireworks. That was extremely exciting.
Gripping.
So you had okay. So you have two versions of the NDAA. One in the Senate, one in the House, of course. The House bill is, to put a word on it, insane. It has a heretofore, never before foreseen amount of insane culture war stuff. Like there was some culture war stuff, like I've kind of alluded to over the last 3 to 5 maybe years. This one is absolutely insane. To the point in the House where even so, I went back and looked the 25 NDAA, the fiscal year 25 NDAA, so just a year ago, had an equivalent level-ish of insane-ish culture war stuff. Didn't get a ton of Democratic votes, but it did get 17 on the floor. And it got a fair amount of support out of committee, the big one being Adam Smith, chairman, or well, not chairman, ranking member, but the primary Dem or the senior Dem on House Armed Services. He actually voted in favor of it last year out of committee. I probably wouldn't have. It was insane, but he did because bipartisan, blah, blah, blah. He did not this year. And in fact, the only Dems that voted for it on the floor were the usual 6 suspects, MGP, Jared Golden, a couple others I'm forgetting, but it's the usual people that have the usual brainworms about things like this. So that's the House. In the Senate, you had something that's, as far as I can tell, never before happened. There's those 2 times where cloture was denied, but it was not on a party line basis. It was just enough people that said they wouldn't vote for it because of the amendment thing. This time you had every single Dem in the Senate, with the exception of Fetterman, who was not there. He probably would have voted in favor, but I don't know, maybe not. Every single Dem in the Senate denied cloture, which is separate but related to the fact that every single Dem on the committee voted against it coming out of committee. So this is a degree of quite literally never before seen. I'd say opposition, but I don't even know if that's the right word to use, but certainly something that historically has always been bipartisan and very heated national environments, i.e. the war in Iraq, that now is the Dems in the Senate have drawn what's a pretty clear line in the sand. I think it's mostly over the war in Iran. There is the whole Israel thing that we can talk about if folks really want to. But I don't think that was a driver of either the votes in the Senate or the House. I think that's more of a kind of internet meme thing. Certainly AOC's talked about it, so yeah, I guess it has some attention on the Hill. But my personal professional opinion would be that opposition is almost entirely due to the war in Iran. Certainly, everything else that has occurred would not really have engendered much support from the Dems on the NDAA. But I think the war in Iran and how it's just kind of continued to drag on, this was kind of their view of a message to send. And last thing I'll say on that for now is because it's not an appropriations bill, it actually doesn't really hurt, quote, anything to not pass it, which is why I suspect they decided to kind of dig in on this one. If you don't pass the NDAA, you can still go past the appropriations. Like, it's weird. It's never happened before. I'd probably need to go back and dig up the relevant law just to see if there is some weird gotcha. But by and large, certainly there's nothing that would restrict you from passing a continuing resolution. Like that's happened before. That you've passed, the NDA has been delayed. Certainly, I can't remember the last time it was actually passed before the fiscal year that it was supposed to be covering. So all that is to say that I think the Dems were, they were drawing a line in the sand on Iran and other things, but mostly Iran, in a way that they knew like it was impactful from a inside baseball kind of perspective, but it also doesn't really matter because I'll still get a paycheck come 1 October if the NDA is not passed. They just need to do something with appropriations.
Right. So, I mean, as long as we continue to have government funding bills, the at least short-term harms of dragging feet on the NDAA are not, in your opinion, gigantic? No. Okay.
Nothing like that. I shouldn't say that entirely. There's probably some policy stuff that I honestly haven't gone and looked that, yes, like somebody wanted to pass it for a reason and it not passing in timely fashion, blah, 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 blah. But even from like a New START perspective, not the nuclear treaty, but the idea of New START acquisitions, that's all tied to appropriations. Gotcha. You can authorize it all day, but you can't actually take the new money for the new program that didn't exist prior to that fiscal year and put money towards it until you have the appropriation. So that's usually the biggest complaint that you'll hear from armed services in particular, and also just senior leaders in DoD, is the New START thing, is we can't move out on this program or that program, but that's not an NDAA thing. That's this is why full year continuing resolutions are a bad idea.
Right.
Nothing to do with the NDAA.
Gotcha. So, I mean, obviously politically Democrats are as unified as Democrats get against the war in Iran. And that's driving a lot of the opposition to this. So you've got a sense here that this is suicidal for most Dems to vote for politically, because it undercuts a significant rationale for the party campaign. And B, as we move on, I think we're in the officially the second Iran war right now, but we'll probably be on the third pretty soon, since they keep restarting the clock every 60 days. So, as we move towards what seems like a situation that's going to be difficult for us to extricate ourselves from, there's a lot of reluctance to hand additional monies or authorities over to the Department of Defense to prosecute this without significant concessions in terms of oversight that have not thus far been forthcoming. Is that?
It is although that brings up something that I said the other day on Blue Sky when kind of this all went down in the Senate, that I'm not entirely sure what their end game is. Yep. Specifically with the NDAA. So certainly with appropriations, try to straightforward. You have demands. If your demands aren't met, you go into a shutdown, and then it's a game of chicken, which they've played to varying degrees of success over the last 18 months. With the NDAA, I am kind of the mind that I think this is their line in the sand is just kind of punting until the next Congress.
Yeah.
Which isn't really a terrible plan. I kind of get the sense that is at least a coin flip probability for appropriations as well, because the CR that I'm pretty confident is going to pass now, because it's gotten through the House and it was mostly clean. I think they threw SAVE in, although I'm kind of trouble keeping track of which bills have SAVE in it and which don't. Because it kind of I don't think it's been literally every bill that the House has passed within the last couple of weeks, but it feels like most of them had SAVE or SAVE related things attached to it. But in any case, I feel pretty confident that Mike has thrown in the towel on as far as a clean CR, whether it has SAVE or not. SAVE's not yet through the Senate, so ultimately a clean CR. But they set the date on that of early December, so I kind of think that that's a last gasp from the GOP on maybe trying to jam the Dems in December, going into the holidays. But I think even they probably know that's not really a likely thing, because now you're talking about lame duck Congress. You're talking, less than a month. Yeah, it's the holidays, but the other thing is nobody really gives a shit about anything other than the troops, and they're going to get paid regardless because we do that illegally now. Kind of gave up some leverage on that one if you're the Republicans. So I won't get paid, but nobody really cares.
What's the legal mechanism for running that down in the next Congress or the next time the executive changes hands? Like, is that something that a U.S. attorney could go after? Like how does that work?
Technically speaking, yes. Now, would a U.S. attorney go after it? I don't know. But it is
political question, obviously, but yeah.
Correct. It is, but yeah. So it is technically a criminal violation. So the Anti-Deficiency Act is a law that has actual criminal penalties associated with it. Now, those penalties are fairly minor, and also it's kind of untested because as far as I know, nobody's actually ever been criminally charged with it. I think the most they've done historically is, an IG looks into it, says, yeah, you broke the ADA, slap on the wrist, bad maybe people will get fired or whatever, but no criminal action. But that said, yes, it does have criminal penalties. And I don't see any credible argument that was not a very blatant Anti-Deficiency Act violation. There's probably some Republican lawyers out there that would disagree with me and would file this 500-page amicus brief on whatever the court case is about this, but
there are 27 liberal law professors who would disagree with that amicus brief, but say that my good friend Hitler 88 makes a fair point.
And disagreeing with him would be some sort of massive violation of norms that are very important to everyone outside of the legal professor occupation, which I belong. So those are more important than whatever else is going on here. So
yes,
that's
not forget about them. But yeah, that particular thing. So there's other stuff that occurred with lapse appropriations that, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would argue it was, but you probably have a better case for being like, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But yeah, the whole pay the Troopies thing using appropriations that were not in any way, shape, or form for paying the troops, and like not even within the same color of appropriation. You know, if you're moving one MilPERS fund to another yeah, okay, I wouldn't do it because I believe in things like the law. But I could at least, kind of squint and get to yes. But yeah, and taking research and development funds to pay the troops, and then presto changeo, you paid back the fund that you took the R&D from to pay the troops with the troop money when you got the troop money to repay. That's quite literally what the ADA was written and signed into law to prevent. So,
but then you'd have, an assistant AG who's got to prosecute somebody for paying the troops.
Right. This is true. Yes, the political question of all of that boils down to you are prosecuting somebody for paying the troops.
Yeah, so
as long as you're not prosecuting the troops, I think you're fine.
It wouldn't. I mean, so that's a fair point. It wouldn't be the troops. It would be certainly some politicals that would be out of the department by this juncture. But there are some GSs. There are some civil servants at DFAS and elsewhere that would almost certainly, if you took a very as strict as reading of as possible, they would have some liability here. So, and like I said before, nobody cares about us. You can prosecute civil servants, don't pay us all day. Yeah, nobody cares.
Right. I mean, like to the extent the hammer's ever coming down on that, it's going to require both Congress that is unified and mad about it, and an executive that is different than the executive that did it in the first place. So, like, you're going to have to. It's not impossible that there could be some consequences down the line on that at some point, but not in this current Congress.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's sort of what I was asking. Because, I mean, look, when President Ossoff takes office, this feels like something that there should be marching orders on by at least the end of February 2029.
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking Ossoff is the one who jumps to mind who would probably actually do that.
That's right.
It's just going to be really weird that he's doing it himself. He's supposed to have, like, people for that. Like,
why do you think he's being elected?
I'm not suggesting he's going to write the briefs, Ed.
I am.
I don't think Ossoff's a lawyer. I don't think he can write the briefs.
He's a talented man, Lotai.
Well, technically, he can write the briefs. He just can't sign them.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
That's what Jones exists for.
I actually totally forgot he wasn't a lawyer, because, like, listening to him grill the shit out of people in Senate hearings, kind of, he has powerful lawyer energy.
I think he was an investigative journalist or something, wasn't he?
Yeah, made films and documentary.
And then he also worked for who's the congressman? The
Lewis.
That's right.
Yeah. We've got kind of a crush on Ossoff. We'll talk about that later.
It's true.
As a collective, I think
it is one of very few things we all agree on.
Yep. So we've got a variety of funny business in the appropriations process, in the NDAA process, but it seems like the likely outcome from here is that we don't pass an NDAA for a while. We get a CR, and then maybe, depending on where things sit in the lame duck, maybe something gets pushed through because deadlines force action, and there might be more appetite for Republicans to compromise when they're about to lose a House, or there might be more appetite for Democrats to try to get something through before things are irrevocably, cocked in a way that's going to prevent passing a future NDAA. Is that how you'd predict things playing out from here? I think
that's true for appropriations. I don't foresee a world where the GOP successfully jams the Dems on approps to, get the GOP's quote unquote favored appropriations through in the lame duck.
Right.
So worst case, we have a shutdown for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. New Congress gets sworn, they pass some bills, and then that's a different game of chicken now between potentially both one or both chambers and the White House. Now in the NDAA, I honestly don't know. So the wrinkle with that is, well, an additional wrinkle with that is the Senate version even includes a fair bit of culture war shenanigans. So not to the same degree as the House, but for instance, the renaming of the department to its preferred term is in both bills. So that is not, so you ultimately you can do anything you want in conference, right? You can always you go to conference, then you could completely rewrite the bill if you want to, and then just go back to both chambers and repass it. So maybe that happens, but I certainly think it's even more unlikely than with approps that the NDAA goes through in the lame duck. Just because I don't see any reason why the Dems would want to go for it in the Senate. And then it would be a question of, and this is where it gets weird, because you can't do a continuing resolution for the NDAA. At least I don't know how you would or why you would, which is usually the get out of jail free card when something comes up like this on the appropriation side, is like ultimately worst comes to worst, you just punt into a full year CR and everybody complains about it, but at least people get paid. There's not that option really with the NDAA. So then the question becomes, if you don't like the NDAA that was drafted and you now control one or both chambers, like do you go back and rewrite an NDAA? Do you just not pass it at all and you just table it and start on FY28? That I honestly don't know, because that'll be a very, I think it will depend on two things. A, do the Dems gain control of both chambers or just the House? And then B, kind of what's the inside baseball on the Dem caucus and what they care about doing, what the investigative priorities are, and how does that align with, do we bother to go back and do the NDAA? Do we just shut up and, strip out the Department of War stuff and then pass it as written? Or do we just not pass it and then we just have a year without an NDAA?
How bad is it if we have a year without an NDAA?
So, assuming I've not missed something on the authorization bit, which I don't think I have, but I'm going to throw that caveat out there because I've not dug wholly into it, and it's unprecedented. I don't really see it as that big of a deal. Like, it's not good. It certainly speaks to a level of lack of bipartisanness, lack of whatever you want to, good word you want to use for defense, which is a change, which is something that I certainly think that senior leaders, uniformed leaders within DoD do not understand. And they are going to be in for a rude awakening here over the next couple years, and then certainly starting in 2029, hopefully. But in terms of like nuts and bolts, there's some policy stuff. Like I said before, there's some policy stuff that was probably good that now won't be enacted into law. Okay, but it's nowhere near on the level of a lapse in appropriations or even the fact that we hate the full year CR so much. Nowhere near that level, which is another reason why it's certainly a live issue to the point of it being like possible that the Dems just punt entirely and we have a year without an NDAA. There'll be much wailing and gnashing of teeth about it on armed services. Oh my God, we've done this every year since 1961. Bipartisan tradition, defense is dead, blah, 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 blah. But other than that, I struggle to see the significance.
Can you just unpack the comment you made about uniform leadership and their lack of understanding that politics exists, because that's kind of funny. That's an amusing little thread to pull on.
Should we just move to section 2? Because I think this is we're heading towards topic, like another entire like ball of wax here.
I can be as quick or as lengthy as you'd like me to be.
49 minutes of recording time so far, and I think I've only talked for about 3 minutes of it, which is a really nice treat for everyone involved. So yeah, go nuts.
One of the really funny things is, like, every time we go put this, up, pulling behind the curtain. Every time we go do this, I compare the file sizes of everybody, and George and Proctor are like twice as much as me and Lotac some weeks. And this one, it will be a change.
So good that we got my audio to, not be complete ass. Yeah, okay, so...
You sound great, buddy.
What was that?
You sound great.
No.
You didn't for the first 25 minutes, but we'll fix it in post.
Face made for radio. So the uniformed leaders not really understanding the politics. So the analogy I used fairly recently, also on Blue Sky, was they're like flightless birds on an island that is just, or is about to have, some very nasty predators unleashed onto them that they have no idea, no antibodies, no anything to deal with. And the reason for that is primarily what I've kind of alluded to throughout this whole line of discussion, that defense has historically been bipartisan. On the Hill, going back decades, but even through the relative angst and upsetting and whatever word you want to describe for the last, call it decade, the age of Trump, as it were. For most of that, defense has been bipartisan. You are in the military, you strictly stay away from partisan politics. That's bad. You're apolitical if you don't know what you're talking about, and you haven't read your Clausewitz. But beyond that, you go to the Hill, you ask for money. The Hill mostly nods and says, "Yep, that sounds good to me. We need more fighters, and Chinese are bad, and we need more nuclear weapons and nuclear this, and oh yeah, Ukraine, yeah, we need to fight Russia, okay." And they basically give you your money, and you complain about some things in the margins, and your civilian leadership complains about some things in the margins. Oh, you only gave us $10 billion for this fighter jet when we really wanted 12, that sort of thing. But by and large, there really I struggle to think of any, like, really, I'm going to say Vietnam era. I mean, even that, like, I hesitate to make that comparison because I don't even think that is a true idea of the reckoning that is going to come down upon the uniformed leadership. Because the Vietnam thing, yes, the Dems on the Hill were certainly not happy with what transpired. It quickly became bipartisan. But at the end of the day, that was less we have a fundamental problem with the entire Department of Defense, and we hate you, the troops, or at least the senior troops, because we think you've done terrible things, crimes even. We just think it was a really bad foreign policy decision, and we need to cut bait. And honestly, at the time, most of DOD, well, not most, but a lot of them were like, yeah, we kind of agree. That war sucked. But anyway, the Soviets are still here. They're bad. So give us money because, we're behind and they're going to invade Central Europe and we need to defend the beer in Germany. Which was the priority reason for the Cold War right there. That's why we had the forces in Germany that we did. No, so
can we go back to Russia and let them know they can have it?
I feel like the Germans these days would have their own opinions on this.
Think of the Poles you got to go through to get to the Germans.
Yeah, the geopolitical border did shift east.
Given how things are going in Ukraine, I can think of, I've made this joke before, but I got to do it again. I can think of very few better days for Poland than the news that they were at war with Russia.
Yep. They'd stoked, that word comes to mind. But yeah, so
Article 5? Article 5 tonight, Queen.
Thumbs up, please. But if you take all that as like the input condition, I can legitimately not think of a world in which you have I'll put it this way: the letter that the both chairs and ranking members of the Armed Services Committee sent over to Hegseth I believe it was either late last year or early this year, about the boat strike, and specifically the first one, about how they wanted the video. Ultimately, they kind of backed down. That wasn't quite the breaking point that I thought it might be. I wasn't fully convinced of that. But the fact that you had that letter coming from both the chair and the ranking members of both armed services committees, and it was extremely, by armed service committee standards, strongly worded. Again, the only thing I can maybe think of would be equivalent kind of letters that were sent between Abu Ghraib and CIA torture. And I'm crossing streams there because that's, the intelligence committees, but, it rhymes. Other than that, I can't think of anything this clearly in the defense space that's basically, we think you did crimes. We're aware of just how bad the crimes were. Now, whether, how bad we think they are, somewhat depends on what letter is after our name. But we, the Dems, we know you did crimes. We know how bad they are. We know how bad we think they are. And we have been getting the vibe from DOD that the uniformed leadership doesn't really mind doing these crimes. Now, a quick counterpoint on that, or not really counterpoint, just another thing, and it's something else that I've made the point on Blue Sky about, is specifically the boat strikes. It's a really small portion of people. It's really not as big as a lot of folks, I'll say on Blue Sky, because I really don't think the average American cares that much one way or the other, but think it is. So you're really talking about a fairly small group of folks. Now, that said, that's just one example. You have the, firing of Lisa Franchetti, firing of CQ Brown. Jim Slife is... there's some real inside baseball on that one with regards to the Air Force. So I'll just say you had the firing of Lisa Franchetti, the firing of CQ Brown. It was clearly for gender and racially based reasons.
These are senior leaders in the armed services who got removed from command, basically because of
Lisa Franchetti was the chief naval operations, so the senior most officer in the Navy. CQ Brown, and Lisa, a woman, obviously, and then CQ Brown was a black man. He was chief staff of the Air Force, and then he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs for about 2 months before Pete fired him without reason. And we all know what the reason. It's not even that Pete tried to make it a secret. He wrote about it in his book. He said he was going to do it in his book. He's done basically everything he said he was going to do in his big dumb book. So all that is to say, and those really, and again, I keep saying it, but those are just two examples. There's many more I can think of that I think are without historical precedent, in the sense that usually if there was something of that magnitude, it was almost always, you could at least frame it through a policy lens. And so even if you could kind of have a plain look at it and be like, okay, that was unethical. People in uniform did bad stuff. Iran Contra kind of maybe comes to mind as a very, very loose comparison. But ultimately, you could basically, if you're the Congress, go, okay, that was bad, but it was basically, people in the White House, people in the E-ring of the Pentagon, not uniformed people. We can deal with it, but it's a political problem. The uniform folks, you did what you were ordered to do, or maybe you did whatever. Not that big of a deal. I don't think that's the case now. I think the Dems in Congress, with a lot of justification, will be gunning for senior DOD leaders in a way that we've not seen for really ever. And DOD senior leaders have no way to deal, or they have no frame, they have no lens to even deal with that, because again, they're used to, I go to the Hill, maybe I get yelled at because Senator so-and-so didn't get, the barracks built in his district or whatever. But by and large, I ask for stuff, we have an exchange, and then they give me money. And this is going to be a big change.
And maybe I'm getting out over my skis here, but it seems somewhat unlikely that this administration is going to be willing to spend a lot of political capital to protect individual generals unless they're very, very much in the club.
No, well, I mean, the pardon question, that would be the $64,000 question. But no, I certainly don't think from a investigative perspective, right? I know what will likely happen is there'll be subpoenas. The subpoenas will be ignored. and then it'll just be the usual game of chicken, but on steroids. Of we subpoenaed you, you didn't comply with the subpoena, so we in the Congress are just going to keep cranking up the temperature, ultimately, impacting funds, availability, appropriations, so on and so forth. The criminal piece, I think, is interesting, but not entirely dispositive to this. And I say that because, you can't pardon away an investigation.
Right.
You can pardon somebody, and Congress, then may decide to not investigate because he was pardoned, so nobody can prosecute him. But the flip side of that is, that assumes that you pardon literally everybody, which that has, political ramifications of itself. But then B, even if you do, that doesn't mean the Dems still can't come in and do all sorts of investigations that will be extremely painful for senior uniformed leaders in DOD. And I guess maybe the biggest thing, or the one sentence way I can try to frame this is, so Pete was on the Hill in front of Senate Appropriations Committee, I believe this previous week, and it didn't go well. He was just getting lit up, justifiably so, but also his performance was terrible just from a former TV host perspective. 10% of that treatment would be unfathomable to imagine directed at any uniformed senior officer, any general officer, any flag officer. And that's going to be the reality.
Yeah.
What Payne got in that hearing, which again was not nearly what Pete got, that's going to be increasingly, I think, what more than a few uniformed GOFOs are going to get to deal with, and that they have no frame of reference for how to deal with that.
In fairness to Pete, he was out of Tanqueray that morning, and he had to settle for Beefeater.
Yeah. And I think you saw that with the way Kane kind of gave some deer in the headlights-esque. And granted, some of that's just because of his background and he never should have been chairman in the first place. But a lot of his responses were very much no, I'm apolitical. I'm nonpartisan. I'm in uniform. Why are you asking me these questions? This is very uncomfortable. Well,
yeah. Some of this has a certain odor of you bought the ticket, you take the ride.
That was literally the quote I was about to drop.
But
Thompson for the win, baby.
These guys are all under the UCMJ. So if there are criminal consequences down the line, that plays out a little bit differently than it might in civilian criminal court.
Well, so it does, but there's another interesting thread that I hope somebody with a law degree that's actually competent that works for a Dem politician somewhere is pulling on. You wouldn't necessarily have to try them in a court martial, depending on the crime. So, and specifically, I'm thinking about the boat strikes.
Gotcha. You can do it either way.
Yeah, if certainly the most stuff either you're required to because of statute and the way that the law is framed, or you just by custom it was a military crime, court martial. But because of the specific nature of those, and this is also another caveat, not a lawyer, but I've talked to some people who are, or at least are adjacent to it. I think you could make a pretty cogent argument, if you so wanted to conduct those prosecutions in civilian federal court and not do a court martial.
That strikes me as extremely bad news for anyone on the receiving end of that particular decision. Am I right in saying that?
I have long had questions about what some mid-rank people that are involved with those have been thinking. Because it's not very many people. And I say that, I keep hammering that for a couple of reasons. A, because it's actually not that hard to prosecute all of them, right? It's one thing if you're talking about prosecuting, all of CENTCOM, for instance. But then B,
that's not a bad idea.
We used to think big as a country.
No, we're just going to disestablish it, and then they. But
not mutually exclusive. We can disestablish it, and then go through the wreckage and charge everyone with every conceivable crime.
I told y'all not to put a military headquarters in Tampa. I don't know why people don't.
There's two of them.
Yeah.
3 in Florida as a whole. Like, what?
It actually explains a lot about the modern military.
It does explain a lot. But yeah, so there's that piece, and then the kind of the related piece is like, I don't know. There's it's just one of those things where I'm like, there are a lot, not a lot, but the of those people that have command responsibility, A, there's not very many of them. B, they're not going to be hard to track down. Like it is fundamentally, because again, I'm not talking about, the people that fix the planes, that did the strikes. I'm really not even talking about like the people that were on the plane that just were doing stuff on the plane but didn't actually pull the trigger. I'm talking about like the direct line of command responsibility from Pete all the way down to the aircraft commander, who would be the one that would have ultimate command responsibility for legal purposes in terms of engaging.
Oh, yeah, the button pusher too. No, add the button pusher too. I don't think we need to cut it off at the guy in command of the plane.
And
I'm serious though. Like I am 100% serious. If it's
so there's certainly a continuum here. I think I said this the other day on Blue Sky as well, that there's the way I would frame the continuum is like there's 3 kind of bins. There's the command responsibility bin, which is kind of what I've been talking about. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you would have like the dude that was making burgers at the base that the plane took off, right? And then in the middle, and this is kind of what you were getting at, you would have like the guy that actually pulled the trigger. It wasn't necessarily the pilot in command. You would have, the other people on the plane. You would have the dudes and dudettes doing some of the intelligence support, maybe. But regardless of that, if you just
command and whoever pressed the button, that's. This just strikes me as very simple. Yeah. Like, you hit the button that ends in a murder, like, that's it. You get charged. Like, or if you tell someone to tell someone to tell someone, whatever, however that chain works out, that's it. Burger flippers, you're safe. I mean, even the intel weenies that are coming up with this stuff, like, I don't, whatever.
The command, the guy who pressed the button, and anybody in Tampa.
And this particular sort of chain here has had a couple of high-profile resignations or force-outs over the course of this whole affair also. So, there's, at least from where I'm sitting, it seems like some people saw either liability or moral problems coming and got out of the way, or got fired because they didn't want to do the thing. Is that?
So, yeah, specifically at Southcom. So there's without going way inside baseball.
Oh, you're going to have to explain Southcom and CENTCOM, aren't you?
Yeah, pretty much. Again, back to Florida. So the very, very, very initial strikes, I think there's enough that's been reported open source, it's fair to say. Those were primarily run out of SOCOM and then JSOC and some other softy stuff, which ultimately is still Tampa's fault. But pretty shortly after that, and this ties in with the firing, or not the firing, the resignation that was really a firing of the previous Southcom commander, whose name escapes me, who was also a black man, although I don't think that had as much to do with it as it did with CQ, Navy Admiral. He kind of suddenly resigned pretty quickly after the first couple strikes. A lot of speculation. It was just alluded to in the press of that, and then there were some other people, a couple JAGs, I believe, which is not great from a overall legality or consciousness of guilt, perhaps.
Not the best look.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just as a canary, like that's, it tells you something when the lawyers start heading for the exits.
Yeah. So there's that. Although the flip side of that is he hadn't said anything publicly. Which, that's obviously very, well, I was going to say very nuanced. It's actually not nuanced at all. But it is indicative of the mindset of the GOFOs that he just kind of defaulted to. Well, I quit because, I was being ordered to do crimes. But I don't need to talk to anybody about that because that would be partisan, and I'm apolitical. But then, so the second piece of that is specifically the individual who took his place. So, and this is inside baseball, but not, I mean, there's other folks than me that in the defense space are aware of this. A guy by the name of Donovan, he's a Marine Corps general, and he has long experience with running strike cells in SOCOM and elsewhere. And the suspicion that I think is probably well-founded, just outside looking in, is he was likely chosen for that position specifically because of that experience. And to give an idea of what I talk about when I say strike cells, if you remember Talon Anvil that made the news a while back in Syria, was a group of soft guys.
Can you just explain Talon Anvil a little bit more?
So the Talon Anvil example I think is instructive. So doctrinally, the way an air campaign is supposed to work is you have the Air Force air component that works for Combat Command, and they do strikey things, and they plan the air war and they execute the air war. That was most of what happened during Operation Inherent Resolve, which was the counter-ISIS campaign. However, there was a different wrinkle with that is a kind of a good example of how what strike cells are, and then also how they can pretty quickly go off the rails. Is there's an entity called Talon Anvil. It was run through, I'm just going to say SOCOM generally, because I honestly can't remember if it was truly JSOC, if it was JSOC adjacent, but right. You had...
I'm going to jump in for 1 second because we're going to have to stick a glossary in the show notes to disambiguate things.
I was trying not to. I'm honest.
For people who don't know this, but just can you very quickly clarify 4 terms for me? SOCOM, Southcom, JSOC, and GOFO. I think if we get those, we'll have most of the picture.
This is how you know Mike is a proper federal worker. The man can hold entire conversations in acronyms.
Absolutely incomprehensible.
I'm trying not to. That's the worst part. Like, I just fired from the hip at work. That's one thing. I'm like, no, like I'm talking to normal people.
I used to work for the Census Bureau, and it was frightening to me that people could do this for the first year or so.
GOFO, general officer, flag officer, is just a general term used for generals. We just don't say general. A, because there's an acronym. Why would we use a word? We don't have an acronym. And then also FO, flag officer, because the Navy doesn't call them officers. They call them, or generals. They call them admirals.
God damn,
they're not general officers, they're flag officers. Okay, so that's GOFO. Southcom is Southern Command. CENTCOM is Central Command. They're the geographic combatant commands associated with the South America, basically all of South America and Latin America and the Caribbean, other than Mexico. Mexico is part of NORTHCOM.
And SOCOM is different.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I said geographic. Good catch. So... Or no, I was talking about CENTCOM and South. Yeah, right. Sorry. So CENTCOM, Southcom, geographic combatant commands, and then SOCOM is. I have a very good thread on Blue Sky actually that explains this in excruciating detail, so it can be linked somewhere if we want it to be. But SOCOM is what's called a functional combatant command. Short version of long story with that is it is a combatant command that has combatant command authorities, but it is not geographically bounded. It is aligned by function. The 3 functional combatant commands we have right now are SOCOM for special operations, TRANSCOM for transportation, and STRATCOM, strategic command, which is the nukes and nuke things. And Omaha, interestingly, SPACECOM is actually a geographic combatant command.
Oh, well, that just makes sense.
Because its geography is defined as, I'm not making this up, it's in the Unified Campaign Plan, which is what lays out the boundaries for all the different combatant command AORs. It is I'm going to say the Van Karman line. I can't remember if it's actually that or if it's a different one, but it's literally the line that we defined as space and then out.
Mike just used the term AOR, area of responsibility.
Area of responsibility, yep. I almost caught myself with that one. So yeah, SPACECOM is a geographic combatant command.
Both Proctor and I are starting to get really good at catching each other's acronym use and term of art use. So, we got your back, man. We're here for you.
Oh, JSOC. And then JSOC. So and actually I talk about this as well in that super awesome SOCOM functional combatant command explainer thread. So JSOC is Joint Special Operations Command. They were the SOCOM before SOCOM existed. Then SOCOM came into existence, and they said, well, now we don't need JSOC because we have SOCOM. what are we going to do with JSOC? And
Is the answer have to?
kind of. So it didn't start out that way. It started out that they will be the home for the super awesome high-speed Tier 1 units, Delta and SEAL Team 6 and guys like that. And we'll give them some other random tasks that are like, basically there's a handful of global responsibilities that SOCOM was given. They're called Title 10 responsibilities just because they're one of the 8 billion lines buried somewhere in Title 10 U.S. Code, which is where most of the majority of military stuff is. And there were things like counter WMD, and so JSOC were the folks at SOCOM said, if we have to go somewhere and, like, I don't know, steal a bunch of uranium, not that would ever be pertinent in the history of the world. We tell you guys to go do it. And then the big one was counterterrorism, which is how how JSOC turned into SOCOM's assassination agency. Was right after 9/11. There's this thing called the Counterterrorism X-Ord that basically said, hey, SOCOM, guess what? You're the guys that we're going to say you just go anywhere you want in the world. If there's terrorists, go there and kill them. And I'm only exaggerating by like 5% with what the actual X-Ord said.
This sounds very Texan.
So JSOC, that's how JSOC became SOCOM's, and go all the way up the chain of the president's assassination agency was what sprung out of that CT X-Ord. They did other things too, but like they were primarily known for basically if there was any drone stuff, other airstrikes, boots on the ground doing spooky snake eater special operations stuff somewhere outside of Iraq or Afghanistan at any point from like November or September 12th, 2001 until now, that was JSOC.
Like say Abbottabad, Pakistan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes, except they were technically working for the CIA when they did that.
Oh, okay.
Which is a whole nother... We don't need to get into Title 50 authorities channels, but I have a thread on that.
We are not putting a flow chart in the show notes.
Yeah. We already committed to the no PowerPoints rule. So now, I mean, you say that they're mostly known for the assassinations, but there's a certain amount of rule of goats that applies here, right? Like yeah. you do a little bit of assassination squad work. That's going to be what drives your reputation.
And point of I not really point clarification is I binned out Iraq and Afghanistan. They were also in Iraq and Afghanistan a lot too. It's just if it was outside Iraq and Afghanistan, like 10 million %, it was somebody in some form or fashion that JSOC was involved. They just also did stuff in Iraq and Afghanistan too, which brings me back to the strike cell discussion. So Talon Anvil with a group of, we'll say JSOC or JSOC adjacent people, I honestly can't remember, not really important, soft guys that were on the ground in Syria or thereabouts, and they were working directly with the folks on the ground who were primarily Kurdish, also other people, but mostly Kurds, the Syrian Defense, or the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF. That was our surrogate force that we were going to use to wipe ISIS out of Syria because we didn't want to actually put U.S. boots on the ground, so to speak. So what Talon Anvil did was a very aggressive air campaign, and the strike cell is very flat, so if the example I used before, the doctrinal way would be the Air Force has an Air Operations Center with a whole long air tasking order and a whole bunch of military planning stuff. And it's all very good. It's the proper way to fight an air war, but it is somewhat hierarchical, and there's a lot of planning and preparation that goes into it. Strike cell, I'm going to be a little bit flippant here, but not really. A group of like 8 dudes sitting in a plywood bee hut somewhere in Syria that have Predator, Reaper, FMV footage pulled up. They have radios. They have Merc chat because the military literally has Merc, or I should say IRC, on our classified network, and that's how we type to communicate. And you have airplanes that are in the stack above you that the air component has said, hey, you're a B-1, you're a F-15, whatever, you're a this, that. Go fly here, talk to Talon Anvil. Talon Anvil will tell you where to strike. And you're just 8 dudes in a bee hut, and you've got planes above you. You got FMV that you think you have some SDF Kurds that are telling you, hey, there's a roadblock over here on this street leading into Raqqa. Go blow it up. And you're just like, hey, bro, these are the coordinates. Drop a couple 2,000 pounders on that. And like marginally more professional, I'll give them some credit. Like they would actually send an actual 9-line, not what I just said, but kind of that mentality, not really near as formal as you would get with the traditional air campaign. Now, why does that matter? On the one hand, it was very effective at killing ISIS. Talon Anvil, to their credit, because they got a lot of flack in the media after the fact, understandably so, for what I'm about to say, but they were instrumental in the SDF's ability to kick ISIS out of Iraq and ultimately get them more or less removed from Syria, at least as a coherent fighting force. The downside of that, though, is you have a lot less checks and balances.
Yep.
As you would with the traditional way. I'm not going to say they were doing flagrantly illegal stuff. At least Talon Anvil wasn't really, but they were certainly bypassing certain things that weren't a LOAC violation. So they weren't a law of armed conflict violation. They weren't a, quote, war crime. They did probably violate the rules of engagement that the U.S. had set, i.e. the ROEs and OEF in the counter-ISIS campaign, speaking very generally, you were required to do a CivCAS, civilian casualty, assessment of, a given strike and, okay, this weapon with this trajectory, whatever, and what we know about the surrounding area, we would expect, 5 civilians to be killed. And, then that assessment would have a degree of, who could ultimately approve the strike. There's good reasons for that. You could argue that maybe it's a little bit too bureaucratic. Certainly the Talon Anvil guys did. But be that as it may, that was the rules of engagement. That's what the ROE was. In a lot of instances, they didn't do that. They would just be like, hey, the SDF guys on the ground, so they're getting shot at from building X. We know there's ISIS in there. We can see them shooting at the Syrians. Send it, drop a 2,000 pounder on the building because we just need to get the ISIS guys out of the way.
And you're skipping the proportionality analysis there.
Yes, so the proportionality analysis, skipping the well, and I should say to be just proportionality is certainly a word that means things.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
You're not necessarily skipping any proportionality analysis. Maybe you were, maybe you weren't. But you're absolutely skipping the defined per the ROE actual, drawing lines on the graph with the circle and the plan, whatever. That certainly would, for the purposes of people in very senior positions made that call.
Right.
Whether you agree with it or not, E6, Snuffy, and Strike Cell, Talon Anvil, that's not your call, man.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So that when I say strike cell, that's kind of the high level discussion of kind of mentality. And so Donovan, whose first name escapes me, who's the current commander of Southcom, who was brought in to replace the previous guy that was resigned or was fired. He has extensive experience. I'll just say in that world, I honestly don't remember off the top of my head how much of it was direct JSOC versus SOCOM adjacent versus other stuff, but certainly he's well known for just being a, quote, strike cell guy, if that makes sense. And so the suspicion amongst a couple of us that we've kicked this around on Blue Sky a little bit is that, he was probably brought in primarily to develop more of a strike cell focused mentality / process for the boat strikes, and then kind of part and parcel of that to take Southcom from what it was and what it probably arguably should be, which is primarily a security cooperation focused command that you do healthcare exchanges and kissing babies, and then you give the Colombians money to go, do whatever they're going to do against the cartels, into like a, quote, war fighting command.
Right. So,
which Southcom has historically not been, because, historically, at least since 1947, we haven't, fought wars in South America, mostly.
Right. Okay, we said we were going to talk about Laura Loomer, so let's get 3 minutes of Laura Loomer discussion on the table here. Now that we've already
save this for last because we know this will be what draws people in. You can sit through Mike's PowerPoint presentation for the past hour or so, and
I'm just proud that I broke the discourse bot.
Propter, I was making an empty threat.
No, I mean this is the Loomer Tower here, right? Like that's a war on terror joke. Never mind.
Arguably, Low Tax's account is the house that Loomer built.
So Laura Loomer's been in Ukraine for the past, I guess, week or so, and has been singing a different tune than she has for the past several years about Russia in particular. And we have some speculation as to why. Low Tax, you want to talk us through what's going on there?
So I didn't really keep up with it. I guess like she took the tongue ring out and went over to Ukraine and I don't know, made nice with Zelensky or something. I mean, presumably like she's no longer on the payroll of Orban.
Right.
And I think wasn't Tim Pool over there too?
Yep.
With his little ski cap because he can't you got to let it go, Tim. Like many of us feel your pain on the hair thing. You got to let it go, buddy.
I'm just really glad I got on the good drugs at like 22. just saying.
Save that for next week. We can do a whole segment on Reddit/bald. So Laura Loomer, the speculation is that there's no more Orban money coming in, and therefore there's no more Russian access money coming in. So all of a sudden she's discovered religion, so to speak. We'll get to that in a second. On Ukraine, she had a sit down with President Zelensky.
What if Ukraine money?
Could be Ukraine. I mean, like not a bad idea. Frankly.
Yeah, no, I would.
To get in on the influencer op game if you're Ukraine, or for that matter, if you're the rest of NATO, that this apparently is how these things get done at this point.
We really screwed up with this podcast, giving that one away for free.
She did also say some extremely racist things while she was over there. So
yeah, I mean, you gotta, yeah.
But yes, of course. They should smuggle the money in through Peter Hungarian just to keep the whole show going. Like we're doing money laundering now, but for woke.
Yeah. I mean, you've got the lines built. It'd be a shame not to use them.
Yeah.
We will have Tucker Carlson turning coat by the end of the week.
We're gonna put Hassan in charge of that institute thing that they've got over there.
Sure, yeah.
Piss Pig Granddad's going to be leading the charge into the contested zone in eastern Ukraine. Brace Belden for those who aren't real heads.
All right, Mike. Thank you so much for dropping by. This was a fun conversation, and I learned frankly a lot.
Yeah,
most of which was not acronyms, but some of it was. So.
People weren't sleeping, at least not here. So we'll see if the audience is not sleeping.
Well, thank you for coming by and putting the full range of normal men on display.
Yes, and please come back sometime, Mike.
With fewer PowerPoints.
Yeah.
We'll have a conversation about an actual topic this time.
All right, that's our show for this week, everybody. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for learning some stuff. And if you get a chance, give us a rating or review wherever you read or wherever you're listening to this. If you're reading this, I don't know what is wrong with you, although Propter's done some magic stuff with that bot, so I don't know. You might even be seeing this in a clip on everyone's favorite niche social networking site. Wherever you're seeing it, rate, review, share with a friend, whatever. That'd be great. So for normal men in Charlotte, a very tired George is done for the week. I'm out. I'm George.
In DC, I'm Propter.
In outer Florida, I am low tax speedrun enjoyer.
And in Boston, I'm Ed.
Stay normal, y'all.